We are in the fourth leg of industrial revolution, which is majorly driven by emerging digital technologies. Now, in this day and age, data security takes the center stage and it becomes a key priority as the threat landscape is evolving by the day and the threat itself is becoming more and more sophisticated. Now, for the government and PSUs, this is even more critical story as the data of citizens and the data of national security is at stake. So in this episode, we'll try and explore how governments and PSUs are gearing up to tackle these evolving threats and become future-proof. So for this episode, to share insights on the theme, I have with me Mr. Vishal Gupta, who is the founder and CEO at Seclore. I'm Adarsh Som from ETGovernment and you're watching our Public Sector Leadership Series. Hi Vishal, so welcome to this episode of Public Sector Leadership Series.
Thanks a lot, Adarsh, for having me.
So Vishal, before we get into the main set of questions, can you share or shed some light on how has been your journey with Seclore and how is Seclore as an idea came up? Where have you reached till now? Any highlights from this entire?
Sure, happy to do that. Seclore is a very interesting story in many ways because in some sense we incorporate the Indian dream, right? So the company came out of the IIT Bombay incubation program, which is actually promoted by the government of India itself. And the original research behind the company and the product was at one point of time a project within IIT Bombay. And from there, the company has grown to today having some of the largest government agencies, enterprises across the world, across about 35 countries, using our technology to protect their most confidential data. And during this journey, I think we've had some landmark moments, right? Being recognized by the government of India itself, as well as in various agencies, including Gartner and NASSCOM and MIT Review, as the leading cybersecurity company coming out of India and made for the world. I think those have been some of the biggest highlights of this journey, and me personally, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Vishal, for sharing that. So, Vishal, today in today's day and age, if you see that most of the operations, be it in governments or in enterprises, public sector across the globe, are driven by digital technologies, right? So, and with more and more technology are coming on the same lines, or let's say at the same pace, the threat landscape has also evolved. So can you shed some light on how that threat landscape has evolved? What kind of trends are we witnessing today? And what are some sort of major attacks that have come into the picture in the recent times?
See, the way the threat landscape and in some sense the evolution of the regulations have evolved is that threats were originally to infrastructure, right? So people or the bad guys wanted to go after the networks or the applications or the devices and compromise any of these infrastructure elements and so on. Over a period of time, what has happened is that everything is centered around data, right? So the bad guys want to go after data, and the good guys are only concerned about protecting the data, and it almost doesn't matter what happens to the network or the application or the devices, right? So the threat landscape has moved more and more towards data and away from infrastructure, right? So what that means is that it almost doesn't matter where this data is, right? It can be on devices or it can be on the cloud, it can be with third parties and so on. As long as the data is compromised, then it doesn't matter. And if the data is protected, then again, it doesn't matter, right? So that's a big shift. And that is also getting reflected in the regulations itself. So if you look at regulations or controls that are implemented by whether it's RBI for the banks or IRDAI for the insurance companies and various regulators, earlier these regulations were centered around process and system controls, right? Here are the set of controls that you must have. Now the regulators also don't care about the process and system, they only care about the data. So if you look at the PDPA, which is in the process of being enacted, it is a D is for data, right? Personal Data Privacy Act, right? So it doesn't matter what is the system and process that an enterprise or a government agency implements, as it is focused on data itself, right? So that's the big pattern change that we are seeing.
Yeah, so Vishal, so you rightly said that today, almost everything it revolves around data. Data has taken the center stage today, right? But data protection again is a key priority for all enterprises, be it government, private, or public sector. Just moving this argument on that front, you know, government of India, they are all set to roll out the digital personal data protection bill, right? Now, if we talk about that bill, there are certain policies in that. There are certain, takes that they have given. So, as per your experience, coming from the industry perspective, what is your take on DPDP bill? Firstly, secondly, how do you think that this bill will impact on the government organizations and other even private businesses in the country?
See, the DPDP is a big leap forward from its closest predecessor, which was the IT Act, right? Once it is enacted, we will move forward maybe 20 years from where the IT Act was last. So it's a commendable journey that DPDPA will kind of culminate in. Enactment of the DPDPA will culminate in. The devil, however, is all in the details, because interpreting it right is a very key part, and making sure that whatever is enacted is actually implementable. Right. So, for example, disclosures. One of the things that DPDPA mandates is that any breaches should be disclosed in a certain time frame, with a certain agency in the government, and so on. Right. Now, that's a very difficult thing to implement, but if it is implemented, I think it will raise the privacy as well as the security posture of the whole country by many notches. Right. So, the first thing is great step forward. The second thing is it will be how well it is implemented, and so on. And my guess is, just looking at what happened to GDPR in Europe, or other similar privacy regulation, the real implementation will be how much teeth does the government give to this act, right? Making sure that if there are enterprises who breach this privacy regulation, then fines are actually implemented and not just reported and buried under, and so on. My guess is that the first set of fines that will come will be the real driver for large-scale adoption for this kind of a privacy regulation.
Right. I think you rightly pointed out that it totally depends on the government how much teeth it gives to the bill, and how well it is implemented in the industry and in the across the country. But there's a major role that consent plays in this bill, right? So it is all consent driven, and any company cannot take any data from any person without the consent. But do you think, I mean, looking at the demography that India has, the diversity of people that we have, with that, which is also translated in the digital literacy, right down the line, that the level of digital literacy reduces. So what are some of the challenges that could turn up when it comes to consent management, and how effective will that be? So coming from a security service provider, right, how do you put that layer of consent in between, and how do you make sure that it is being effectively used?
It's a big topic, but my take is that getting consent is going to be borderline trivial for companies, right? Because it is a part of a long agreement incorporated in this I agree button somewhere in that app or that website or whatever, right? And everybody just clicks on that I agree without reading through what is in the agreement document, right? So I don't think asking for consent is necessarily going to be the teeth that the government provides to the regulation. I think the key is going to be, hey, what is the minimum that you need to ensure, right? Even if you have consent, right? What is the minimum? What is reasonable for any agency to do is going to define the posture. Almost nobody reads the agreements or the license agreements of any sort that comes up in apps or websites or any of these things, right? So I don't think that's going to be the teeth. The government just needs to constantly up the low jump bar of how data of citizens is processed and managed by each of the agencies. I think that's the only solution.
Right. So coming back to the data security point, which we were talking before this question. So, These days, generative AI is one technology which everybody is running after. It's a buzzword, right? And every company, every organization is racing to have certain implementation of generative AI models in there. But with the onset of generative AI, the threat landscape has, complicated further, and it is even more getting sophisticated by the day. Threat vectors are proactively adopting these kind of technologies and further, launching more and more complex attacks. So, looking at this scenario, firstly, how do you think Seclore can come up with some effective solutions to enable the governments and the public sector organizations to keep these attacks at bay, to basically give them, enough capabilities to identify these attacks and keep their data safe as much as possible? And so, what will be your take on that?
See, right now, between the, let's say, the bad guys adopting AI and the good guys adopting AI, the bad guys have definitely taken a lead, right? So, threat actors have adopted AI at a far rapid pace than any agency in the government or even within enterprises, right? Because for them, that's their bread and butter, right? So their life depends on it, in some sense. Our take right now is that the best way currently that is available is to not let confidential data enter AI systems. Because once confidential data enters AI systems today have very poor controls on how they manage that confidential data, right? So the only option is control the input itself, right? And Seclore is doing a lot of work in that, or has already helped a lot of enterprises in making sure that the most confidential data just doesn't get into the AI system at all. Because once it gets in, AI systems up till now have very, very, very poor capabilities to distinguish between what data to reveal to which person, which user of the AI system, and also making sure that privacy control, I mean, there is security, but also privacy controls are implemented. So we are helping a lot of government agencies and enterprises in just controlling the input itself on what goes in. So for example, if in the Seclore context, if a document or an email is marked classified either automatically or manually, then systems like Copilot and others just cannot go into that document itself, right? And that currently is the only measure that is available.
So, can you share a certain use cases or let's say success stories, any case studies which have already implemented in certain government entities or public sector companies with us on these lines?
Sure, we have some of the largest defense and investigative agencies in the country using our product in most cases to protect national secrets. And the way, in the context of AI, but even otherwise, that these agencies are using Seclore is that certain classes of documents and emails and data in general is classified as highly confidential. And we make sure that no AI system can just come in and interpret that document or that email. And what happens is, in that case, the AI system is still effective, right? So large scale adoption of AI can still happen, but while continuing to make sure that confidential data is not exposed to the AI system, right? So that's what we are doing. So in the context of some of the largest, we have a couple of the financial regulators, investigative arms, which are used for fraud investigation and so on. They are able to get the AI system to do faster and better fraud detection, but without compromising the privacy of all the information of all the people that are involved in this investigation, for example. Similarly, some of the defense agencies, we are helping them mark data like troop movements, right? In the recently concluded Operation Sindoor, troop movement and so on is highly confidential data. You don't want AI systems to get access to any of the data, but you do want AI systems to be able to interpret other forms of data and give intelligence on what is happening on the field, what is happening in the headquarters, and so on. So being able to make that distinction between, hey, you should learn from this data and you should avoid this data, right? That is something that we are helping a lot of government agencies and public sector units and so on do.
So one of the key answer to this question is basically restricting the access to the data, right, that AI system has.
Right.
Now, moving, ahead on this lines only, I'd like to understand from you that, these AI systems, they are well trained on the data that you're,
Providing, yeah.
providing, and of course, the quality of data that matters, and restricting access from the, solution providers perspective, you can do that.
Right.
But security is not just one person job, or let's say it's not just one area of where you can just put a switch on and off and then you are completely secured.
Right.
It's basically sort of a culture that gets developed in an organization, and everybody, in fact every person working in an organization is an endpoint, right?
Yeah.
So we need to secure all of them. For that we also need to do some let's say awareness programs or training modules, right? So that our employees of the government agencies or these ministries, they are well aware about what kind of threats are there, or what sort of areas where they have to keep themselves protected.
Right.
So what are some of the best practices that government entities or the public sector companies can adopt to keep these attacks at bay?
So I believe, others, that the best way to make sure that adoption of security practices is there is to automate those practices into processes and systems, right? So it's one thing to get 100 people in a room and train them on security and so on. But if those same trainings, a large part of that training can be actually incorporated into the system and process itself, then the need for people to change behavior for security goes down. So that's one. So our belief at Seclore is that, hey, automation is one big, big way in which all the security processes and controls can be implemented without the need for people to change behaviors, right? So that solves 70-80% of the problem. The last 20% you can't avoid, which means that you still have to make sure that security awareness programs, making people aware of what kind of information are they handling, making them aware that, hey, what are the downsides of them being reckless with the handling of the information, right? So that is the human training and awareness part. But we believe that requirement can go down significantly with automation, and automation of specifically data security.
Right. Also, if I talk in terms of service delivery, right? So government has a lot of e-services that they are offering to the people, and not just in urban areas, but also in rural areas, also in tier 2, tier 3 towns, right? And in those areas, in the remote areas or rural areas, the digital literacy is comparatively very less, right? Also, there is a huge digital divide. So people have to actually go to a kiosk, or let's say a CSE center, and then to avail a service, there's somebody who is sitting there to help them out. Now, these people are not very much aware about cyber attacks is still a big thing. They are not even aware of basic digital tools and how to use those tools, right? So let's say if there's a there's an AI system that's working, or there's a malware that comes into the system, right, which is exposing their personal data, because they are used for any service, to avail any service, they are using Aadhaar cards or any other government ID, right? So how government can ensure that these endpoints are protected, what steps they can take? I mean, since you are a security provider, so as per your perspective, how they can ensure that these points are protected?
Yeah, so see, driving awareness in a country of 1.5 billion people is tough, right? And awareness, making that farmer who's going to a kiosk to find out which mandis is he going to get the best price for the product in, is a very tall task, because India is just such a diverse country that driving these programs is very difficult. The only hope for a country as large and diverse as we are is to make sure that the security of that data is built into the data itself. So even if that kiosk, for example, or the network provider and other infrastructure elements that get involved in the chain, even if they are compromised, the data doesn't get compromised, right? So again, I go back to automation being the only option for a country as large and diverse as India, and with the number of services that are getting provided, right? So today, I can't think of any government service which is not digitized and streamlined, or in the process of getting there very aggressively. So there's a lot of progress over there. We just have to make sure that the data itself carries with it its own security and its privacy. And therefore, the need for education and behavioral changes, for example, which is almost like a generational shift, which, between the digital nomads. I mean, these are people who grew up non-digital and then have migrated or are being forced to migrate over, and the digital natives, right? The 5-year-olds or the 10-year-olds who are born in that world. There is a big divide between these two worlds, right? And that's going to take one whole generation to get to where we want to be. In the short run, automation and focusing on data protection is our only hope.
So thanks, Vishal. It has been quite a wonderful conversation till now. We'll come to the last part of the interview now. So you have recently, you are about to launch one of your offices in Delhi. So, what are your future plans for for Seclore in the India business?
See, we are very thankful to the government in general, right? The company itself came out of the IT Bombay incubator, which is very, via many layers, is finally a Government of India initiatives. So we want to be a significant part of the nation building and the national security, goal. And to that extent, we are focused heavily on the government, public sector units, defense and investigative agencies, any element of the national critical infrastructure. Right? We've had the good fortune of working with some of the largest PSUs and the largest government departments already, and we just want to make sure that Seclore is part of that nation building process, and the expansion and significant focus in Delhi is part of that program, right? So we believe that we just as a nation, we have to start treating data as the new oil, right? It's a critical asset. It's what every company in the world is after, and that's what we have to protect.
Thank you, Vishal. Those are some really wonderful insights, and thank you for sharing that knowledge.
Thanks a lot, Adarsh. Thanks for having me.